Bro, out of everything that God has created, there are many things which are very consistent, right?
Hmm.
The sun rises, the sun sets.
Hmm.
Flowers and plants grow, wither and die. Seed turns to harvest. Rain comes. You know the rest. I was thinking about this recently, and this was actually funny enough during a time that I was training in the gym, where a lot of the revelation seems to flow.
Hmm.
But a question that came to mind for me was, out of all creation, is mankind potentially the one created thing that has the potential to most embarrass God?
Wow. Tell me more.
So this might be a bit of a funny conversation.
Yeah.
If you're interested in finding out about consistency and all of them type of things, this episode for you. Welcome to another episode of the Reason to Behold podcast with Tolly Talks.
And Arnold Reasons. We are back.
We are back. And yeah, man, this conversation, bro, is something that, like, again, embarrassing God is a strong, obviously, statement. But I think I was just thinking about the point of, like, if I made all of these different things, right, and I've designed for them to operate in a particular way, and I've got a list of things which are fairly consistent. Like, don't get me wrong, obviously, because of the fall, we know that there are certain things about other created things as well which don't operate as they ought to, right?
Hmm.
But I think where my mind really went with it was I was thinking, like, imagine if the sun was as inconsistent as we were.
Oh my gosh.
Imagine if the seasons, if all of these like things which we take for granted, even just oxygen flowing, bro, just the exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide. Imagine if these types of things were as inconsistent as human beings. What would the world look like?
I think it's such
if
an
we took it
interesting
to its
thought,
extreme.
because I wonder, does God get embarrassed, firstly? Like, is embarrassment a thing that he feels? Or, like, how does he feel when he sees us living the way that we do and not doing the things that we do? And I think that actually the consistency of everything in nature, I think, is meant to be there to show that God exists, right? Because it says about how, basically, how nature shows that God exists. What's that verse? Do you know which verse I'm talking about? Where it's about, the
Romans,
heavens
I think
declare,
it is. I think it might be Romans 1. Is it?
Let's find out.
For real.
Romans 1 verse 20. See scholars.
There we
See
go.
scholars in our midst.
Come on. Say it, brother.
Says, forever since the world was created, people have seen the earth and sky. Through God, everything was made. They can clearly see his invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature. He is speaking through his creation, and he's waiting for you to listen. So I think that part of it is that God made those things so that we can see how he operates. We can see that the sun always rises, the sun always sets. We can see that there are seasons. We can see all these things about nature, and through that see that we have an everlasting, ever consistent God. Right? So he's part of that, is that he's created it for us to be able to see that. And I think that that's part of what's meant to make us want to be more like him. That's part of what's meant to make us want to say, hey, I want to get to know God more, because he can create something so crazy, so amazing, and it's so consistent. So I think part of it is that it's there to show the difference between us and him.
I hear you. But I'm not entirely satisfied, bro. And you know what it is? I don't think it's so much even just about what you're saying, because I think I hear the point you're making as well, right? I think it's just like, again, I'm gonna find at some point in this conversation what the word I'm looking for is, even instead of embarrassed, because I don't think embarrassed is even fully capturing what it is that I felt and I was thinking about and reflecting on. But are we not part of that creation? If you get what I'm saying, that is supposed to demonstrate and be a reflection of his nature and his ways, if you get what I'm saying, especially us who are the redeemed, right? Because we are an earthly representation of what the kingdom looks like, and what we ought to be a reflection of what the kingdom looks like, the king's way looks like, so that in the same way we would look to created things and be like, wow, how glorious, right? those that are outside of the kingdom ought to see us and
Mm.
be like, wow, how glorious.
How glorious.
Right.
Mm.
And this is something that appeals to me, something that intrigues me, something that I want to know more about. I want to know more of. But I think what seems too common, at least in the parts of the world that I've experienced so far, is the opposite. Right. Where rather than having an experience or an encounter or a kind of just level of exposure to something that just seems so attractive, it seems to be repulsive. It seems to be the opposite, because like, yeah, go ahead, you got something.
Because I was thinking about what you said, and when I think about, for example, what God said to Jesus, he said, this is my beloved son in whom I'm well pleased. When we think about what he said in the story of the talents, where he said, well done, good and faithful servant.
Come on, man.
Like, I just wonder, what's the opposite of that for God?
Come on. Yes. Yes.
What is the opposite of I am well pleased with you? Is it displeasure, displeased?
And we actually even get a preview into one of that in one of the examples you mentioned with the parable of the talents, right? Because Matthew 25, 14 to 30. Let's just skip down to where it is. So if you don't happen to know what the parable of the talents is, Matthew chapter 25 will give it to you. But I'll go back to previous episodes where I think maybe 2 episodes back, Peter gave a breakdown of what it was. And we speak about it a lot in several other episodes too. But the one servant, right, who buried his talent, what was it that he says to him in verse 26? But his master answered him, "You wicked and slothful servant. You knew that I reap where I have not sown and gather where I scattered no seed. Then you ought to have invested my money with the bankers, and at my coming I should have received what was my own with interest. So take the talent from him and give it to him who has the 10 talents. For to everyone who has will more be given, and he will have an abundance. But from the one who has not, even what he has will be taken away. And cast the worthless servant into the outer darkness. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth." Wicked and slothful is the contrast, right?
So it's interesting because
go ahead.
It's good and faithful versus wicked and slothful. So it's not good and faithful versus wicked is pretty similar to good, or like the opposite. But the opposite of faithful is slothful. Not unfaithful, it's slothful. So that's interesting. Actually, we're not meant to be lazy. We're not. Inconsistency actually comes from laziness and lack of discipline.
Absolutely.
Slothfulness. Bro, do you know the Bible verse that always like haunts me? Is the one, a little more sleep, a little more slumber, turn into your bed like a door, whatever it is, and poverty will come upon you. And it's that thing of like laziness, slothfulness. It is a problem.
It is. And how interesting is that even that verse that you just mentioned speaks about how poverty will come upon you. And even in this verse where he's speaking about the contrast, for to everyone who has will more be given and he will have an abundance. That's the contrast. It's like there's such a connection between the consistency, between the laziness, which is the root of it all, and a lot of these, for lack of better words, embarrassing moments that we probably reflect to God.
Because I think that...
Go ahead.
No, you go.
You know me, bro. A lot of this stuff just comes back down to the well done, my good and faithful servant, right? Because it's like, I don't think, even as we've been talking through these verses, I don't think we would even take slothfulness as seriously as the words in these verses paint them. Do you get what I'm saying? Because it's kind of like, I don't feel like doing it. Kind of, maybe tomorrow. There's just like a lackadaisical kind of approach that we have when it comes to, I guess, being consistent in all things reflecting him. And I wonder what the world would look like, or what our worlds would look like, if we gave it the weight and the responsibility and the seriousness that it should have.
What I was thinking about was,
Mm.
I think it's Psalm 23, where it talks about the Lord is my shepherd. It says, he leads me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake.
Come on.
We are bearers of his name. Yeah, whether we think about it or we don't. So for me, it's like, when we are doing the things that we do, so, the Olympics have been on, and there are so many athletes in the Olympics that are Christians, and they're talking about, this is how I'm glorifying God. So on the biggest stage for sports, they're saying, it's God that empowered me to do this. I'm doing it for his name. But equally, just like you can do it well for his name, you can also do it badly for his name. And some of the things that we fail on as Christians in terms of his name is just our love walk. Are we walking in love with people? Are we known as Christians who bear his name to be a loving people? And that's often the first hurdle that we fail at. But all these things that we do are for his name's sake. And if we're lazy, like, people are going to defame the name of the Lord because of us. And that's where I think, even what you said about embarrassment, or it's almost like we're shaming his name more than glorifying his name.
Man. Ezekiel, we've been to these verses at least once at some point in time in this podcast. From verse 16.
Okay.
Do you want to go for it?
Sure. Then this further message came to me from the Lord. Oh gosh. Son of man, when the people of Israel were living in their own land, they defiled it by the evil way they lived. In Matthew 25, it said wicked. Wicked and slothful. Wicked and evil are pretty similar. To me, their conduct was as unclean as a woman's menstrual cloth. They polluted the land with murder and the worship of idols. So I poured out my fury on them. I scattered them to many lands to punish them for the evil way they had lived. But when they were scattered among the nations, they brought shame on my holy name. Wow. For the nation said, these are the people of the Lord, but he couldn't keep them safe in his own land. Then I was concerned for my holy name, on which my people brought shame among the nation. And when God was going to smite the people of Israel because they were moaning and complaining and this, what was it Moses said? He said something about, but then the Egyptians will say, see, their God couldn't even, and that's how he brings God, like, for your name's sake, don't kill all these people, even though they deserve it. He's like, for your name's sake, don't do that.
Yeah.
So check this. If you keep going down in that verse, it says from verse 25, it says, then I will sprinkle clean water on you and you will be clean. Your filth will be washed away and you will no longer worship idols. And I'll give you a new heart and I'll put a new spirit in you. I'll take out your stony, stubborn heart and give you a tender, responsive heart. And I'll put my spirit in you so that you will follow my decrees and be careful to obey my regulations. And what this, for me, talks about is some of the things that God tells us in terms of how we should live our lives, in terms of what we see in even the Proverbs about laziness, slothfulness, about righteousness. Like, those are the things that God is empowering us to do. And he tells us to do those things because it's the right way to live. And when you live that way, the fruit that comes from that is what he wants us to eat of.
Just before you go on as well, bro, even just, again, that contrast between the heart of stone and the heart of flesh, like in connection with what you're saying, the heart of stone is dead. It's like it's not sensitive. It does not beat. Do you get what I'm saying? Whereas I think with the heart of flesh, I think what is supposed to happen is that we are supposed to like develop a level of sensitivity to the need, right? To the lack, to the fact that there is a requirement to not be slothful, as an example, and to actually have some level of regard and care for that, rather than to just be dull and dead to those things. You get what I'm saying?
And I think something worth considering as well is that everybody's version is different, right? So if we go back to the story of the talents, it says that he gave them in accordance to what he knew they were capable of, right? So to one person he gave 1, to one person he gave 2, to one person he gave 5. So I can't compare myself to you in terms of outputs. I can't say, well, Arnold got 2, I should get 2 as my output. You might have only been given 2 and I might have been given 5. Or I can't say, well, Arnold's, got 5 now as his return. I've only got 2, but he was given 5, I was given 2. So it's this thing of, it's not about comparing, and it's not about how slothful or how active am I comparatively to other people. It's what am I achieving or what am I doing in relation to what God has given me? And only you and God know that. No one else knows that.
This is why comparison with the wrong application, if you want to know about the right application, go back to a couple of previous episodes we've spoken about it and a few of them. But the wrong application of comparison, one of the reasons why it really is foolish, because even when you think about the whole thing of 1 talent, 2 talents, 5 talents as an example, right? Or 1 particular thing, 2 particular things, 5 particular things, gifts, capabilities, skill sets, whatever you want to call it, seed. What's the time frame on that? Because what's to say, like, because you know, sometimes, and I don't know, maybe I'm just sometimes think about things abstract, but like we see like the snapshot of, to 1 he gave 1, to 1 he gave, if it's 2, I can't always forget if it's 2 or 3 or whatever,
2, 1, 2,
and to
5,
1 he gave 5, right?
Yeah.
But it's like, the question for me is, what is the time frame? Because the person that has 5 maybe didn't necessarily have the 5 all at once. Do you get what I'm saying? What if that person had 1, then another was given, then another, over a time period? Do you get what I'm saying?
I thought it was all at once.
And equally, the return as well, what's the time period on it? Because I think we see a lot of this is what was given, this is what they produced, right? And for me, even thinking about it from an investment point of view, which is one of the things that has stayed with me when I've looked at these verses, is that, again, like, it's not just an upward chart of, okay, you gave me 5, right, boom, I put it in the machine, it came back 10. That's not necessarily how it always works. There can be losses along the way, but the ultimate end goal is that you end up net with 10, right? Which works out to be way more than the potential losses and stuff that you may have gained along the way. And I guess trading and doing business in general, because these are monetary terms, right? I don't believe that what was being painted is the idea of a perfect transaction for each of these servants, if you get what I'm saying, or one necessarily singular transaction. Because it's about, you were entrusted with X amount, this is how much they got back. And this was the result of what the master said to them. And I think...
go on, sorry.
In terms of that whole time frame thing, if I do look at what is currently within my reach, if I'm now trying to apply this and I look at what's within my reach right now in my world, right? And I think that that's the finality of what God is going to potentially entrust me with, then that would be potentially a very limiting perspective on what may be true. Because the things that God entrusted me with 5-10 years ago are very different from what I've been entrusted with now. And if you look at my whole life's picture, you can count and say to me, yeah, you had this was this is what you did with that. Like, you can do a full accumulative kind of calculation. But if you look at it just in that moment, it's very limited.
So I think there are a few things. So I was just reading through it. And one of the things says that the story of a man going on a long trip. Yeah. So it sounds like he knew he was going on a trip. And also from some of the context, it sounds like this is something that he did regularly. This wasn't like the first time this had happened, because the guy the wicked one, he said, well, I know this about you. Yeah. I know that you do this, you do this. So this is what he does. Yeah. You know that he does these things. So one of them things is that he went on a long trip. Yeah. So he gave them a decent amount of time to bring a return. Yeah. It sounds like he did give them everything all at once, but I think that this isn't the only trip that he'd gone on. I think that this was something that he did time to time. He'd go away, leave his money with them. They would do what they do with it because it talks about according to their abilities. So he must have known what their abilities are. And one of the ways he might have known what their abilities were was because this is something he's done before. He's left money with them before. They've brought a return and etc. Because even at the end, it says about, well, take it from the guy who had 1 and give it to the guy who had loads, which means that the guy who had loads was now going to invest more money and create more return. So this is something for me that they do like on a cycle. This isn't just like a one-off exercise, and that feeds to your point about, well, at some points, maybe the guy who was now five coins or whatever, maybe he had 1 to begin with and he'd worked his way up. He doubled it each time and now he's at his 5 stage, which links into what you were saying about, look, what I was trusted with before isn't necessarily what I'll be trusted with now. I think there's something in it that you're right. Like there's a build. It says that he who's faithful with little will be faithful with much, which means that over time you get more and more and more. You don't always get everything all at once. You have to prove yourself faithful before God gives more to you know? And that's so important. Like God wants us to go from strength to strength, from glory to glory. He wants us to be trusted with more and more and more. But we have to prove ourselves faithful with whatever it is he's given us.
And you know what? Something that occurred to me, which I don't think I've necessarily sat with when you said that, is that the opposite is also true. When we prove ourselves unfaithful, things can be taken away. Do you get what I'm saying?
100%. And they will. They will. Because why would God continue to give you things if you're not stewarding what he's already given you? It doesn't make sense. If you've got a friend who you lend your stuff to, because really it's stewardship, isn't it? Like everything that we have is really on loan to us. Like it's still God's. If you lend your friend your car and when it comes back, it's got scratches on it, you know, someone's been sick in the back, are you going to give them your car again? No.
Bad credit. You ain't even getting in as a passenger. You ain't even getting in as a passenger, bro. Like,
you're not allowed in my car. Do it. Simple.
Don't do it, man. Sober thoughts, man. Sober thoughts.
I think for me, I've been challenging, and I'm feeling like the challenge about the slothfulness and the am I really being faithful with things. Like, so there was a few years ago where, you know, that verse where it says God is the author and the finisher of our faith, you know, and even like the verses, and it says when he completed his work, he rested. Like for me, those things are like finishing stuff is a character trait of God. You know, we need to be people that finish things, that don't just start stuff, but we actually see it through to the end, and that we're faithful with the things that we've been given to do. And I think it's just, it's just been a really big challenge for me of late about like, okay, are you really being faithful? Are you really being a finisher? Are you getting the stuff done that you're meant to get done? And not just the stuff that, you know, doesn't get you in trouble, but like the stuff you're meant to do.
So I want to help someone. On that point about finishing, how would you advise someone on, I guess, the line between continuing with a view of finishing and when it might be the more appropriate decision to stop?
I guess what do you think that split is personally? Like the split between finishing and when you should really quit?
Yeah,
because I think
go on.
No, you go.
I was just gonna say I don't know, because I think this is the tricky thing, right? Is that even with like finishing and what finishing is in a particular situation, I don't know how straightforward it always is. Because some things it's clear as day, right? There's a race. This is the finish line. That's what finishing looks like, right?
I think it depends on what promises you're making. And that's why I think even when it says about let your yes be yes and your no be no, and about sometimes like you've sworn to your own hurt, so you have to finish. Like these are some of the things where for me I'm like, well, it depends on what promises you've made. If you said, hey, I'm going to serve here for 5 years, you might have to finish your 5 years because you've said that. See what I mean? Like, so that's where for me, first thing, under promise and over deliver. Firstly, so when you're making those promises, under promise and over deliver. Firstly, But if you've promised to finish something, like you should probably finish it. Where I think what you're talking about makes sense is that, for example, you had the shop, you had the tech repair shop. And you said, okay, at this point, I'm not going to do it anymore. It's not profitable. And you hadn't set a time before where you said, I'm going to do this for 7.5 years and blah, blah, blah. You were just like, well, I'm building the shop, and it came to an end. You actually finished the season of the shop. So you pivoted out of doing the shop, but that doesn't mean that you didn't finish. Because what does finishing look like? What was it determined as? And that's what I'm saying. Like, sometimes I don't think it is even as complicated as we might think. If you're running a business and you've not said, okay, I'm going to run this for 10 years and this is what God has told me to do. If God has said, run it for 10 years, finish by running it for 10 years.
Run that 10 years.
Run it for 10 years. Even if it's losing money, whatever it is, you don't know why God has asked you to run it for 10 years. Finish it. But if it's just actually, there's no set plan from God about how long this needs to be, then do the things that you need to do, but maybe there's something in that you need to finish. So let's say, for example, you were doing house renovations maybe finish the house renovation and learn the lessons you need to finish, even if it's going to lose you money because you were meant to finish it. Maybe you've not stewarded it well. Yeah. But don't just be quitting. No, like that doesn't. How does that help you?
I like the liberty in what you described because I think it's true. It is true. Like if you're in a prescriptive situation where you know that you have a specific word or instruction on a particular thing, then my friend, run that thing to the very end for your own sake.
Yep.
Because something that I've learned the hard way is that when you take the exit ramp early, you'll find yourself circling back to that same path, potentially in a different form, to now restart that same journey. Do you get what I'm saying?
Yep.
So I think, and this is the other side of that, is that sometimes when you don't see the fruit, and I don't know who this is going to help, but sometimes you don't see the fruit that you're expecting or the fruit that would make you feel like this is the right thing to continue. But the assurance that we have is that because I am staying here faithful to the one who has called me to be here, this is going to work out for my good. And I've seen that work out in my life, bro, so many times. So whoever that helps, let that help. But the other side is, like you said, like if this is just a case of I'm not necessarily operating on a specific instruction or a defined word on a particular thing, I'm just walking according to the best that I know how, maybe prayerfully and all of that kind of stuff, right? Don't overcommit with your words.
Bro,
and again,
honestly,
this is something that I've learned this the hard way too. Honestly. Again, right? All of these lessons are just hard lessons that have just taught me, but humbled me at the same time, because you really don't know. Like, it's what James speaks about the person that goes and says, yeah, tomorrow we're going to go to this city and go to that city and all of that kind of stuff. Listen, take time because you don't know what tomorrow holds, right? And I don't think that means that we need to not plan, because this is where now we start getting into, okay, so should we not plan? Should we just I don't think that's what it's about, because planning is godly and all of that kind of stuff. Again, see some of our previous episodes will be spoken about that, right? But I do think that there is a level of healthy humility we should have even with our plans and our intentions for the future and the days ahead, and being measured with our words. Because yeah, man.
And something that keeps coming to me is about finishing well. Yeah. I know for me right now that there are some things that I probably need to stop doing, right? Things where I'm volunteering with whatever it is, or I'm doing something. And there are some things that I know that I need to stop doing, but how I stop doing it is really, really important. So I did this podcast with a couple of pastors who had pastored for I think it was 25 or 35 years. And they knew that at some point they needed to transition over to someone else, right? And they really inspired me because they did a 5-year plan of how to finish well. Yeah? I'm not saying everything has to be 5 years. But what I'm saying is have a plan of how you're going to finish well. How am I going to leave this place better than when I started it? Because let's say I've made a mistake and I've overcommitted myself. Yeah? I can either just exit really, really quickly and leave everything in a mess, or I can say, look, I'm not going to be able to do this 2 months from now, 3 months from now, whatever it is. What needs to happen between now and then for me to finish well? There is something about finishing well. It's really, really important, because often we'll just want to quit and just leave. But you're quitting and leaving in a mess. Even if, let's say, there are some people right now who are in a church where they don't feel like they're meant to be anymore. Yeah, there are some people who are in a tough situation, but God wants you to finish well. He doesn't just want you to leave in discord and disunity. He wants you to finish well. There are people who are in jobs where it's not going well. Yeah? God wants you to finish well, because that is part of your witness. Because you think everybody else can't see that it's not going well. Everybody else can see that. Everybody else knows that. Yeah? But part of your witness and your testimony is, look, Tolu was in that situation and it was horrible, but he finished really well. And how did he finish so well? God gave him the strength to finish well. Tolu's a Christian, so Tolu believes in this, this, and this. That's what happens in those situations. There is something so important about finishing well.
Yeah, man. I think that's a good place to wrap it.
So what's your final word to the person that you wanted to help?
Stop embarrassing God. No, I'm playing. No, but I mean, half playing. No, but I think, in all seriousness, I think there is so much potential that exists in us being who he has called us to be, operating as he has designed us to operate, and being earthly representations of what he is like. So much rests in that. And equally on the opposite side, there is so much just, what was the word that the scriptures used? Shame and profaning of his name that exists when we don't do these things. And so I think it's important that we're encouraged to pursue the potential that exists. Right?
Agreed.
Take one step forward. Like, make those little shifts. And I think where we know that we've fallen short, there's grace, there's mercy. Like, today is a day and another opportunity for us to choose to do better. Because I know even when I search myself, bro, like, maybe there is some areas in my life that I feel like I'm executing, but I know that there's a lot more room to execute a lot more, right? So I think it's just a case where every single one of us has the opportunity to continue growing in our embodiment of godliness. And that's just the journey of the believer, right?
And it's for our good. Like, God tells us to do these things for our good. It's not because he's wicked.
Yeah.
You will be better in so many ways on the other side of it, but you have to go through the process. You have to.
Yeah. I think that would be my final encouragement. How about you, though? Before you wrap it.
No. I think I 100% agree with that. Like, I 100% agree, and I don't have anything to add. Thank you guys for listening, and we'll catch you on the next episode. Peace.